And we'll start. Okay, this is Clif High. This is a repeat of an interview, just a perfect interview. Damn, I was so pissed. It was just great. Interview with Steve Nico Williams yesterday. This is the redo because I bollocksed up all of the sound stuff. And I think I've got it now, and we'll give it another shot. I'll not ask him for a third repeat. Anyway, Steve Nico Williams is the CEO of Populous, which is a really cool space. And good morning to you, or good afternoon to you, Steve. How are you?
Hi, Cliff. How are you?
I'm doing fine, and hopefully it'll be a lot easier on you today. It was easy on me yesterday, so I'm gonna have to work today to get all of that stuff back out of you. It was just a stellar interview yesterday. Why don't we start with your first historical epiphany moment about data? I mean, and just pick up from there.
Okay. Well, so basically, as I explained yesterday, my foray into data was basically looking at financial data sets that were contained in the company's house in the UK, and that is basically a place where all government, basically where all companies file their end of year returns and annual accounts,
So,
and
so
they get,
you were actually looking at deep government data at that sense, correct?
yeah, companies, but stored in a government facility, basically. Yeah.
Yeah. And so it was that began you on your journey that led to this interview yesterday and again today, correct?
That's correct. Yeah. So basically, it basically had all the annual accounts, profit and loss, the debitors, creditors in their account, and I just basically wanted to know how how companies become basically so successful and basically sell for basically the process of actually the selling of a company. So that's what I was actually looking into the data at the time then before I got deeply involved into understanding the intricate details of data itself and and it plays a role in the world basically today.
Right. So in essence, it was really a collision in your mind at that time between value and data because you had just come across I can't remember the name of the company you told me, but it had sold for some whopping huge amount of millions, and that got your attention.
So basically like I said, I was always fascinated with financial times and looking at companies and their price earnings ratio. I did read a book before based by Jim Slater, The Zulu Principles, which gave me a basic idea of how companies work and valuation, and that is what basically more or less gave me that the interest into looking at that data. So I basically started looking into the data at Companies House and realized that the same data is what the other credit aggregators use, the data aggregators use to supply to other companies.
And
And
and these data aggregators would be on the order of those people that would place valuations on companies like Moody's or some of these others, and any other kind of aggregator that may have a use for these giant clumps of data.
Yes, exactly. So Moody's, Standard and Poor's, Dun and Bradstreet, Experian, all those type of credit reference agencies, and I understood that at the time then the only way they can get that data in that format because they had it in like spreadsheets themselves, and the company's house had it in PDFs, and it was basically free to view there. Well, you pay some money, but I mean, it was not as expensive as if you were taking it from the credit aggregators. So I knew that at the time then that they're inputting these values into the spreadsheet, and it was not possible for me to do my full in-depth analysis how I wanted to do it on those companies because of the cost. So I would basically use 50 to £60 every week to go in and look at annual returns of companies and just basically find little bits of data that I could build a bigger picture with. So I believe a few years passed and XBRL was introduced, which is extensible business reporting language. So it is a business language that is used to make values and elements within inside those financial accounts more accessible to people that want to basically do analytics or analysis on those financial records.
And in that sense, it's sort of like HTML is the markup language for displaying to humans on the web. And so XBRL is the extraction language. It's sort of the an opposite reverse, so to speak, a machine extraction part of it for your business terms.
Yes, yes. So it's basically the language that is, instead of being on the PDF sort of format, it's a language that you can extract the financial elements of an account from it. So I noticed that this is an opportunity to get on the level playing field with these aggregators. So hence why I started building the XBRL extraction tool for extracting these elements from these documents, which I counted, which numbers were about 1,500 elements over 2 million companies, which we were basically, after building the software, we were actually taking that data in real time into our databases.
Cool. And so you, as you said yesterday, you'd gone through the stack or the heap approach with MongoDB and ended up with SQL Server, correct?
Yeah, so at the beginning process, we were into this sort of we were in it. We were basically into the zone of, I don't know what the term is, but it was around that period of big data and the ways to store big data storage, and Mongo was the preferred NoSQL database to store. But upon using Mongo, I realized that it was becoming very memory intensive on the server, and as it was a hobby, what I was actually doing at the time, then it was not benefiting me in a sense. So I kind of switched from a NoSQL to a more structured sort of database, Azure, Microsoft Azure, which gave me a better, more pricing and allowed me to store data the way I wanted to, instead of JSON array, but into columns and cells, which was easier for me to carry out analysis on those data sets.
Well, it was also more business-like in the sense of ledger-like at that level, as opposed to the JSON database sets. JSON, by the way, guys, is JSON. It's a JavaScript object notation. It's used for storing structured data. Mongo is a database that runs on what's known as DOM, the document object model, and so it is very intensive because it has to lift the whole document up into RAM in order to get at any given element. And if you've got an individual document that's got 1,500, 1,500 data elements, and you've got a lot of those, you're going to get your RAM really cluttered really quick. Whereas SQL Server only presents you that data you request out of the database itself, which remains on the disk, and so it's very efficient. So basically, what Steve did was to run into a convergence of himself and the temporal universe, because he was right there when big data really started taking off with the reduction in price of storage and the development of these tools. And he sort of fell into this whole universe that was created, and he mixed about with big data in these various databases and ended up with a huge hobby that was probably sucking a lot of money out of him at the time, and that he just couldn't let go. And that's where we are today. He's still chewing on that critter.
Well, it's eased a bit now, so yeah, but we're still there. So yeah, I mean, what I found from the data. So after compiling the data, we started looking at other data sets and crossing them over, but we tended to use the more financial records, which we had those elements to focus more on those ones at the time, then to cross them with other algorithms, with credit reference algorithms, in a sense, creating our own credit reference sort of module and competing with those guys. So like I mentioned yesterday, the benefit of that was we no longer needed to pay companies like Equifax, Dun & Bradstreet, the £1 that was required for every single document. So the example I gave yesterday was £1 over 2 million companies. We would have paid near enough at least $1 million or more, even at a discounted rate, which for any entrepreneur or anyone doing research, which I would have called it at the time then. I still call it research when I'm looking at different data sets. A really expensive habit, and I basically didn't have the money to pursue that type of habit then. So building up the extraction tool basically put me on a level playing field with the corporates, and hence why I started looking into different types of algorithms to find solutions to existing problems in the financial world.
Sure. Let's also stop for a second as we're gradually working our way to a description of how populace arises, and provide a larger picture here of what you're actually dealing with. Because as a young lad, you're walking along, you get gobsmacked right in the face by the valuation equaling data, and see data as a valuable thing that can be extracted and dealt with. You develop a tool set to do this, and it's just you and a bunch of your mates in a sort of hobby, sort of mucking about, but it's costing you real money, so you decide, well, maybe we'd better make it pay for itself. How can we do that? And you start thinking about these things because you're still hooked on the research aspect of it all. And in the meantime, the world around you develops very much Doctor Who-like, as these things such as big data and cheap terabytes of storage arrive to support you. And then you start looking at this from a more mature aspect, in the sense of, okay, we've got this data, and now we can put it back. We had to take it from the spreadsheets, which were a ledger format, go through the PDFs, go through all of the XBRL extraction, to put it back into SQL Server, which we don't really look at, but we can make it display any way we want. So we've decided to display it back in this business format. And so there you go, you've got all your business data laid out, and the eureka moment or the epiphany moment starts to come up upon you. And you were telling me about that yesterday, and I've had those myself, especially about big data. So I really empathized with where your destiny went bad and big data got hold of you.
Well, yeah, big data can take you off the course of where you think you're actually going, and it could put you back on the course. And that's exactly what it did. I mean, after getting my head around it, I mean, just to clear things up, when I say we, I more or less speak as a present sort of tone now with the group around me now. But at the time then, it was just myself that created the extraction tool by myself. Now I tend to say we, as in the whole team and everybody, as we're working today forward. But yeah, it became that eureka moment when I managed to put the puzzles together in my brain, and when I basically saw the whole world at large and how it actually works, then we had the light switched on, and then I knew from there that, okay, Steve, don't try and be a jack of all trades. What you need to do is focus on the area which you've found a solution, and basically sell this data. So that was my initial foray into selling data. So I was basically I had found a solution, found a way to create an algorithm to find these companies that required a form of cash flow, and the people that were going to finance these type of companies were the banks at the time.
Sure.
And
those were sort of your customers at the time. Your potential client base would have been the banks at all, and you figured that you had a better way to do what they were already doing at that stage. Right. Now let me describe, for instance, that these 1,500 data elements you're picking out would allow one, if one were in the business of being a hedge fund or something, they might use that data to try and find real winners. On the other hand, banks might try to look for, use that same 1,500 data elements to find a good, solid business that was in some financial strait as a potential client to give loans to. So that level of discrimination, the 1,500 data elements, allowed you to extract and look at either end of the picture or the middle, anywhere in between. And at your end, your focus was on, these people are getting themselves into a situation where you can tell just by the way in which the spending goes, the invoices are coming in and all of that, they're going to need a loan. And brilliant thinking. I mean, most people miss that because they try and go the hedge fund route and look for the real winner sort of things, right? But this is the bread and butter. This is where banks make their living.
Well, that's right, and it is a route that the approach I took is the root source in terms of how they would start. So I kind of analyzed the whole process of what they would do in terms of the banks, in terms of they probably would send out various messages or mails to these companies and go knocking on their door, knocking on the business owners' door one by one, because there is no other solution in place at the moment, and basically just at random chance asking these guys with the little data that they have if they required invoice finance or anything in the such. So I mean, creating this targeted data set was a major sort of innovation in the sense of my bad. I need to plug my charger in. Sorry about this.
That's all right. That's fine.
I just totally forgot.
Reality intrudes, and it was my software hardware screw up yesterday that made us redo this.
No, so, let me see if I got that in. I'm sorry about this. I think I got that in. Hold on 1 minute. That one. No, that's not. Sorry about that. Oh. Sorry, can we pause for a second? Sorry about this.
Sure. Yeah, no worry. I'll put a pause on it right now. So we're good?
Okay. Yeah, we are.
Okay, cool.
No more interruptions.
All right. So you were talking about the discrimination of vision you had with the data insofar as this, and then you'd run up against the banks that were probably also doing this. Only the banks had to send out all their foot soldiers to pound on the doors and get these people to say, "Hey, do you want a loan?" And that's where we left off.
Yeah. So I kind of worked out that it's a very expensive process for them to do that, and they're probably employing hundreds of people to go around knocking on doors. And if I can limit the amount of people that are going around and give them a target data set, then they would just basically ring up those guys, offset it against the contact details they got there, ask them, guys, do you need factoring? And likelihood was yes, because basically what I did with the data was not just produce targeted data sets. I actually went back in time with the company's house and looked at those companies that are taking out invoice finance already anyway. So what I basically was doing was proving the concept and the algorithm works, because the companies that fit that type of model are the ones that had taken finance in the past.
Sure.
So,
let me intrude for a second and tell people that when you're doing deep data modeling, you create your database, you have a hypothesis about what you're going to seek. Obviously, if you think that in the future what you're going to seek is going to show up in the data, the likelihood of it already existing in the data in some form is pretty high. So what you do is you go back and look at the data and mine it for the model you want to find, and then you can use that, what you actually find about that, to fine-tune what you're looking for in the future. So Steve was able to look at those companies that needed financing now, that he knew were taking financing, and using their criteria, their existing state of being, as his metric, he was therefore able to make sets around that would allow him to extract other companies that also were in that same state of being. Correct?
Exactly, 100% correct. So basically, a scientific method that I used basically for that was a method called cluster analysis, and basically that kind of grouped the size of the companies and split them up into various groups that fitted with each bank's criteria. So what I had there was I could basically see the size of loans each bank was given to a particular group of invoice sellers, basically, potential customers. So I would create a records for those targeted. So I actually drilled into a more targeted sort of data set. So I mean, so that was going all right for the meantime, and I just really felt that I can do more with that data set and look into other solutions. And to be honest, there was a lot of competitors that were selling a lot of targeted data, were selling data to these banks. But so I was kind of like it was kind of like a saturated market where it would have took me longer to prove myself and through the results
Sure.
than I wanted to wait around and try and do.
Sure. As you were developing your tools, you ran into the same situation in competitors' companies. Some of them may have had a slight first mover advantage. As you say, it was already a saturated market, and that's when you started getting your building pressure for your second epiphany moment. Correct?
Yes, correct. So yeah, so getting to that now. So I basically thought to myself, I really, what's stopping me from actually creating a element of what the bank are doing at the moment. So creating an invoice finance sort of platform or business, and basically trying to actually do what the banks are doing and do it myself. So I started looking into the development of an invoice factoring company, the creation of one, and I approached various companies and other people to see if they want to get on board. First of all was the insurance company, which is Euler Hermes, and basically they said to me, "Do I have £1 million for the credit insurance?" And I said, "No." So basically said we can't help you there. So I mean, I kind of hit a roadblock there in terms of the capital that is needed at the time then to start a invoice factoring business. So
Well, let's also stop for a second and look at the milieu, the excuse me, the world in which you you found yourself with this. Not only did you hit the insurance wall, that insurance wall was one of the deliberate barriers to entry that's put there by banks to keep that business to themselves. And so they do this all the way along the line. We've seen this as a pattern of the activity. The fiat banks are dying, and this is exactly why you and I and everybody else in crypto space is all excited and doing stuff, is because these big dinosaurs are getting out of the way. However, you ran right smack into some of the walls that those dinosaurs had placed to keep this level of business to themselves. Because as I mentioned yesterday, factoring, which is the ability to take an invoice from a client and as a promise for a debt and give them loan, that factoring is 28% of global banking profits. So it is a huge thing they would want to protect. And apparently they said, well, let's just smack this kid right up the head with the insurance and be done with him.
yeah, well, yeah. I mean, they're probably doing that to myself and others that were trying to get into a market that they're basically trying to maintain basically for themselves. So I mean, it was a blow. After months and months of research and thinking, finally everything else is in place apart from just the credit insurance. I mean, without insurance, you're basically like you can't really proceed forward. So I mean, I kind of left it for a bit and started to look at the data in more detail. So crossing other data sets, as I mentioned yesterday, crossing housing data, land registry data. So I did find a few other gems in terms of companies in recession, repossession sort of market, which is still a open picking field. I'll get to that another time. And I just really thought that there is something in crossing data sets which kind of opened my eyes a bit more further into tightening up the model in terms of what we have now. So what we did was what we basically did or put together was that if we could get the data in the first place and we can sell it to them, we can find a solution around it, the insurance aspect that is blocking us from that to entry to the market. So like I said, I left it alone. I started looking around other types of ways and other platforms, how they work. This was probably the emergence of the fintech sort of industry, where you have companies like Market Invoice, and saw their model. And I decided that what I'm going to do is I'm going to try and sell my solution to companies like Market Invoice. So I got on the computer. I emailed Market Invoice. I emailed a few other companies that were in the fintech space, and I don't know what it is when really no one really wants to look at anything. They're quite content with what they've got.
It's called not invented here. I ran into that myself.
and it's just off-putting. So I just decided that I'm gonna go and look for something totally different. So Hence, I started.
This would have been about 2 years ago.
Yeah, this was about 2 years, 2 years ago, coming up to probably about 1 year and 6 months now. So coming from the 2 years into a 6 month short period, then I started looking into well, basically what it was is my friend that basically said he's trading Bitcoin, and I thought, what the hell is Bitcoin? What are you trading? I've dabbled in stocks and shares in the past. I've made money, lost money. It's not really a thing I want to do. I can't control the outcome of a price of a shares. There's so many different factors that
Oh,
are not.
and it's rigged. They can see you betting against them, but you can't see them.
Yeah, and yeah, that's right. And it, I got stressed out from doing that. So I didn't. When he said Bitcoin trading, I just thought, okay, how long is this going to last? And the funny thing was, he he's not really a financial guy, but he got the hang of this trading. So it made me look into why he has so much interest into it. And then from there, I started attending meetups. So one of the first meetups that I went to was a meetup called Coin Scrum.
Which is quite famous, people.
Yeah, I mean, Paul, a guy that runs it called Paul, is it Paul Davis? Paul Davis, a very nice guy. He gets loads of speakers, a load of companies that are making products in the crypto sphere, and they speak to us and tell us what they're doing. So that first one I went to was a pub quiz, and it was basically a quiz that had questions and about Ethereum, about the DAO episode. So we're kind of in that realm of the DAO collapsing, not too far from what happened there, and it got me thinking in terms of the like these guys were building something smart, using smart contracts, and they almost got there, but then something went wrong. A hacker got in, and maybe they didn't set their code right. But what could have happened if they had built this system out and it worked? So it started making me think like, oh, wait a minute, there is something here. So then that's when I started saying to myself, it wasn't a eureka moment just then. It was a thought of, oh, I got this data, then I can put this data into the blockchain without thinking or knowing how the blockchain works. Well, you can't put data in existing data. It has to be real-time data that is going basically in.
Yeah, let's point out to people that the blockchain is a virtual computer running in what is called cloud space, and so storage costs and computation costs are equal, and they're pricey, and so you wouldn't want to store lots of data there because it would just cost you a huge amount of money and it wouldn't be worth it.
No, you'd be basically doing triple or even 10 times what I was doing when I was using MongoDB. So I don't think anyone wants to even think about trying that. It's not really practical as well anyway. So I mean, so what I basically done was to reevaluate the plan that I was thinking around the blockchain, and thought, okay, I can't put all this basically the whole 1005 data points into it, which is not possible. But what I can do is I can start creating these types of smart agreements or smart forms where I will basically give to companies that if they're going to open up trade accounts with themselves, they can store this data on the blockchain, and then I can use the amounts raised or the debtors or the invoices there to offset that against these financial annual accounts in XBRL format, and then basically have a real-time accounting system that measures the debtors and creditors. But the only flaw there was it wouldn't be precise. It would only give an indication of the value of the transactions that I would have received from the invoices, but there could have been a lot more transactions that would have passed my eyes, and it would have made it, although we would have had some information, it wouldn't have been too viable to use that information on a sort of wider scale and for a more accurate analysis.
Sure, it could have been a big, you'd never know how big the hole was you were missing, and it could skew your results not knowing that.
That's correct. So, and it could open up for areas for fraud and people take advantage of it when we're trying to do the opposite. So I just, then it dawned on me that, wait a minute, why am I not using this whole technology to build an invoice factoring platform? the smart contracts can do the transactions autonomously. Also, in a decentralized manner. The trust element made sense where there's no rigging of the auction. The settlement is real time. And the Eureka moment came there again. And I just thought to myself, oh, I'm right bang on time.
You were in the sweet spot temporally, correct. You were that person.
Yeah, that's
Well,
it.
well, let's stop for a second here, and I'll give my perspective on this real quick and provide a bigger background here for Populous. So, invoice factoring is a huge business globally. It provides the liquidity for most of the planet's small to medium enterprises. These are companies with 500 or fewer employees, and these enterprises usually have 50 or less, and the vast majority have 20 or less. So these are the real mom and pop and the people that do things, and they need to have the ability to float from month to month, pay their employees, and not go out of business because they're waiting on somebody to pay them. And invoice factoring is that float. And up until the invention of Populous, or up until the invention of cryptocurrencies, we've had no vehicle whereby you could do invoice factoring without involving yourself in banks. Banks have, all kinds of barriers to interest, barriers to getting into this business to keep others out, and so they charge just huge fees, as well as staggeringly nasty interest rates, such that someone might lose, as a small business, you might lose approximately 30% of your expected income just trying to cover the float. So you'd take 70% and the rest of it gets eaten up in the bank's profit and fees. And but you're able to survive, but you're barely surviving. So it's very parasitical. And so in my data sets, I've been watching for the prescient descriptions within crypto space, and I saw one that was relating to factoring. And I knew from my own experience as a small business owner how vital factoring is and how usurious it is from the bank's viewpoint. And so I also knew this was a very ripe area for disintermediation, because there are so many people on the selling of the invoice side, and also to some extent on the financing side, when private money is used, that are getting screwed by the people in the middle. So if you can get them out, you can lower costs all over. Everybody will make a lot more money. And the beauty that okay, so I'm examining my data. I see that, oh, look, factoring as a space is going to open up in crypto space. It's got huge legs going out hundreds of years. It's going to be a giant area. And we see within this factor crypto space, the concept, I won't go into details, take too long to describe it, but the concept of super dominance will arrive. Super dominance is when you have someone like Google that comes on out, and Google gets 85% of all search requests and all ad revenues, and the next guy down, he only gets 7%, and the guy after him may only get 3%, and so on. So there's a giant gap between the super dominant player and the next one. And this is what we're going to see arise within the factoring space. And in this case, it won't be because of barriers to entry. The data sets describe it as being one of efficiency and a mutual harmony, in the sense that the super dominant player will offer real solutions to the people that have real problems. And so I'm out looking in crypto space, and then because of the way that the language around Populous emerged in the sources that I use, it was one of the first ones to show up. And then I delved into it, and I had my aha moment, in the sense that, yeah, these are some serious players here. It's perspective is exactly in line, harmoniously meshing with the temporal reality we've got now, and the need to undo the bank's lock on factoring. And so this was why I started writing about Populous within the reports. Had never had any contact with Populous, the team, had not met Steve or any of his associates, had no intention of actually ever acquiring any Populous coins or anything myself, simply because that's the way I do business. I don't preload myself with emotional bias towards anything. And ended up seeing the Populous token for what it was, and then a whole lot of drama and brouhaha ensued that led to Steve and myself meeting up here. But Steve's got he's got the space by the tail, so he's on top of this giant tiger, and he's got some really effective tools, in my opinion, because he's pulling them from the business extraction language viewpoint and from deep data research viewpoint, not approaching this as oh, hey, look, there's a lot of money to be made over here. How can we cut ourselves some of it? He came into it saying, oh, look at all these problems. Let's go see what we can solve. And isn't this cool? I can use all of my data to do it. Pretty much, right?
Correct. Exactly. Hit a nail on the head. That's right. I mean, so most people come into the space thinking there's money. You're right. It's totally the opposite as we were thinking, in the sense that we're coming to this place to solve problems. And they basically say a business should focus on the problems first before it focus on the money, and the money will follow. But equally, the money is important as well in terms of growth and revenue. And so we basically looked at the platform. We basically looked and said, okay, yeah, this Populous can be built to not only be the first mover in the industry, but also break down certain barriers to entry, which is globalization, which is stopping everyone from participating in invoice factoring. So that was one of our core features of the platform, was to allow anyone to trade with anyone from any country to basically any country. So a guy from India can trade with a guy in Denmark, and with the littlest requirement of capital needed. So we made sure that it is as small as it is, because not everyone has £50,000, which is required in these financial marketplaces to participate. So we lowered the barriers to entry on cost as well, which is basically around $100 to start, or even less. It just has to make sense for the gas fee of the smart contracts. So sure, you don't want to be paying for something and you're not making the money. So when I use the term $100 or £100, it could even be less, as long as you're making the margin after you deduct the gas fees and everything else that cost to run this type of auction process, basically.
Okay, let's stop for a second. I'll clarify some of this. Steve's talking about running smart contracts on Ethereum. The Ethereum network, as I said, is this giant virtual machine that ultimately somebody's got to pay the electricity for. And so they built into the Ethereum the idea of gas. And you fuel up your contract and it runs and eats up gas, and somebody's got to pay for it. And these gas things ultimately go through to become Ethereum coins, which ultimately can be turned into fiat. Steve's also talking about the idea of a huge level of disintermediation, because prior to the cryptos coming along and Populous rising, there's been the banks as the gatekeepers, and after a while with the invoicing business, they said, well, why should we use our money? And so they would get all these other people's money to pool together, charge that pool a whole lot of fees to make it into an investment vehicle for factoring, for buying invoices, and then it would charge fees and interest rates on both sides, and the bank was growing fat, happy in the middle and using other people's money to do it. And you had certain, again, barriers to entry, because the banks wanted to keep this business to themselves. They would say, oh no, you can't touch this for under £50,000. That's your minimum buy-in, and you got to conform to our rules and stuff. And what Steve has done is to eliminate all of that, chop all of the costs of these bloated bankers out of the middle of it, and allow pools of capital or individuals of capital to participate globally in buying invoices globally on a trust machine system, which is these smart contract auctions that run on Ethereum. So we're talking about a major level of global market disintermediation that is exactly parallel in its own space to what we're seeing with Veritasium and some of these other cryptos. They're just taking on different spaces with this disintermediation model. Correct?
Yes, exactly. So so along with the breaking down the barriers to entry, we'll also focus on cost and efficiency as well. So what we noticed in these contracts in the first place, which is kind of hidden, is when these customers are actually sign up for this factoring process, they're not aware, firstly, that they're going to end up paying around 10 to 15,000 just initial agreement fee.
That'd be £15,000, correct?
Yeah, depending on what country you are, it could be £10,000 to £15,000, or $10,000 to $15,000. And that kind of upset me in a sense where, why do you need such a large fee, when you are already like, as a bank, is already receiving the revenue that they use to cover the overheads as well. So they're just basically adding layers and layers of fees for agreement fees, which really shouldn't be there. So we removed that from the from the platform as well. So we don't charge a great agreement fee or arrangement fee for setting things up. And the second thing was efficiency as well. So getting this whole process done after being accepted onto the program via the banks, or having that, it then takes a process of, for example, I use other platforms. You'd have to have some form of trade or someone buying it, and the settlement mechanism for them to agree that purchase of the invoice before you get your funds. So the smart contracts really helped in that sense, where once the auction or the crowd sale has been completed, the funds are immediately sent to the wallet of the invoice seller, and that is real time basically. So the other element that we had to overcome was basically the stability in terms of the volatility of actual cryptocurrencies themselves. So there is no way on earth that we could have just used Bitcoin or Ethereum to trade invoices, because in this type of market, the margins are very small in terms of 1% to 5%. Starting from, and if you're using the swings in cryptocurrencies such as Bitcoin are swinging like that,
sure, they'd wipe that out in a minute.
Wipe it out. So it was unrealistic that we could have just gone into this with your popular coin and say, yeah, we've got an invoice factoring platform, and this is what we're doing. We're trading in crypto. So anyone else who's saying that they're using crypto, they need to have a huge think of when you're loaning items or whatever you're doing financing. It's not going to happen when the margins are the interest that you're going to be charging against your loan in the real world. It's not going to work really. So what we introduced was a pegged type of system. So we created a pegged token called Pokens. So it's not like the game Pokemon. The name is derived from pegged and token, a combination of both. So what we did was we took a standard approach to say, okay, any investor that invests funds, whether it's fiat at the time then, which we use as our base example, they would deposit funds. They will be issued tokens. Those tokens will reflect the funds that they deposit, and then they can use those tokens to trade inside the platform against the invoices.
And let's be clear for the audience here that by using tokens, these pegged tokens, you're forming you're disintermediating the actual capital and the sloshing around that's going on in the currency, whether it's fiat or whatever, and the use of the token in the factoring business itself, because of course you don't want to try and buy or sell an invoice if you're buying and selling it in a currency that is fluctuating more than maybe even the invoice itself is worth.
Well, that's it. Yeah, you might end up having the guy having more than money than he required for the invoice, or you could have or him getting less than what he required and saying, "Oh, I didn't agree to this. This is the percentage that we agreed to. Why is it 10% short?"
Sure, and it's just like people going abroad and they use a credit card to purchase, and they come back and find out, no, that thing didn't actually cost you the 90 euros they said, because the credit card company added such a huge fee, it ended up costing you 130 euros, and you don't know that until after the fact.
That's it. And there's nothing you can really do.
So this is really another cool innovation that you came up with, which is this a way of buffering the invoice trading platform from the swings of any currency, because of going through the peg token approach, which was designed basically, as we might think of, as a barrier to the exact issue of sloshing back and forth with the currencies themselves. But it also offers you great security advantage because you're not dealing in anything that's going to be a target and has its own potential weaknesses like Ethereum or Bitcoin or whatever.
That's right. So the tokens. So what we said, okay. So as you just said, we have some element of control of the tokens inside the platform, but then we gave it the same features as Ethereum and Bitcoin, so you can actually remove the tokens from the platform to an external wallet, and then they just become like your Tether coin or any other type of stable token.
Now, are
So
these, excuse me, are these ERC20s?
yes, correct. Yes, ERC20 standard.
Are you thinking about moving to the ERC23 standard?
Yeah, yes, we are. We are at the moment. That is a discussion where I'm having with Z, which is one of our top Solidity developers in terms of ERC23. Yeah, because basically they can, if I'm clearly correct me if I'm wrong, but they can recognize the address of where the funds are being
Correct.
sent
They're
from.
safer for noobs. Basically,
Yeah,
what it amounts to is that, I've heard of people that have inadvertently sent ERC20s off, and they've disappeared because they've sent them to something that couldn't accept, could accept it, but couldn't do anything with it. And so the
that's correct.
ERC23 token, it's kind of a way, guys, of making cryptocurrencies that are smart enough on their own to say, no, you're sending me someplace I don't want to go. Think that over. And so,
Send it back.
yeah, and the new standard on the ERC23 I liked a lot. There was some really good thinking about that there. The
Yeah,
issue with the ERC20 tokens and the use of them, from my viewpoint, is entirely self-enlightened interest on the part of businesses to move over to, simply because it makes their customers happier, because it's a layer of protection for people that don't know what they're doing.
that's right. Yeah. So I mean, yeah, it's like a safety mechanism built into the token itself, which is it's good for those guys. We always hear the stories like, I sent it to this account, it's not the right. I sent it to this wallet, it's not the right address. So yeah, basically it clears up that as well, as you just said. So we use those, and we give the peg token, the token, a life of its own when it goes outside of the platform. So not going into too much, but one of the thoughts that I had when I created the token was, in the near future, in 5 to 10 years time, I hope to see tokens being used on e-commerce websites as a stable sort of currency that traders or vendors won't be too worried about the fluctuation of buying and selling something on their website. So if
Now,
they have
and
such,
this will be because, in essence, these tokens will be backed by the sheer volume of the invoice business that's being done through the Populous platform, correct?
yeah, correct. And the tokens have to come back to us anyway to release the fiat. So you give us back the tokens, and then we just wire your funds there back to you, to your account, subject to KYC and AML processes and procedures that will be in place for dealing with the old system. And so yeah, so the tokens were working then in the platform, and it just basically gave us a perfect playing field to create the whole populace, and in harmony with every type of issue we were thinking we've resolved all those issues now.
Well,
And
and
the
let me
next step,
intrude here, okay, because we're right at a very good nexus here. One of the things that attracted me to Populous within the space once I started mucking about was the fact that you had thought these things through. There was indications that guys were really focused on compliance and security, which is in data integrity, which is really necessary here, and that you had the wherewithal to think about the larger issues of currency fluctuations affecting your market, and how your market could ultimately, or your platform could ultimately be used to dampen, so to speak, currency fluctuations within your own ERC20 token, which you've pegged and called tokens. And so that was when I thought, aha, these people are thinking about stuff. They're not just mucking about in this space. They've really got a plan here. And so that's why I started thinking, okay, all of the linguistics are good for Populous. It is fitting into the space and the perfect temporal time, and so I'm going to recommend it to those people that read my reports. And at that point, we ran into the real world of crypto company information runs into the external desires and needs of other individuals, not necessarily harmonious. And so your Populous token had gone through the ICO, and then there was a whole lot of FUD, fear, uncertainty, and doubt that was being spread around about Populous and there was a lot of language that was inappropriate and a lot of language that was not factual at all. And there continues to be some of that going on now, but it's dampening down. And this interview is entirely designed to present Populus's focus on this and to give you a very decent platform for responding to the FUD. Now, we also have to note that there seem to be some indications of people doing the FUD to try and drive out weak hands that were holding the Populus coin, because Populus, like a lot of the other cryptocurrencies, has a lot of small players investing in it as opposed to just a couple of big whales. And so you guys found yourself in the unfortunate position of learning the real business lessons that not everybody out there is all that nice and friendly as to how they go about this. And you guys were just out doing business, taking care of stuff. And so that's why I felt that I had to go ahead and do the interview and make the effort to get it out here, because my influence had been offered as a wedge or a carrot or a stick. I don't know how it was done. I didn't look at the details, in causing some of the FUD to occur. And it really pissed me off. so anyway, and Steve's a really cool guy. I always love the code head approach of the language I saw in Slack. And it is true that, as we discussed yesterday, Steve had to isolate on GitHub, which is a central social repository for developers. He had to isolate some of their intellectual property and put some of these elements of what they're developing into restricted access repositories, so you won't see these the Populus GitHub reflect the same kind of activity that you would with an entirely open source crypto. And because they do have proprietary stuff here. He's been working his butt off for years on this and has his model well developed, and it's A, inappropriate to share, B, it would take him forever to explain it to people, and C, it is their bread and butter that makes Populus run, so it makes sense that it's all isolated. And I had no problem with that. There were some people that were casting aspersions on the activities of Populus because of, not because of any solid evidence, but because of what these individuals saw as behavioral inconsistencies, such as, you know, being sort of open source, but not really. And as far as I'm concerned, you can be 100% closed source as long as you're effective and transparent about what you're doing, because your smart contracts must necessarily be transparent to the people that are operating. Now, let's also say that Steve has run into, or Steve is actually disintermediating a huge level of institutional racism. Globally, if you're involved in a small, medium enterprise business, you will come across a Western bank at some point, it doesn't matter where you are, that you'll end up having to try and do business with. And not being the approved class or race, when you go into this bank, you pay for it. They charge you more dealing with them than if you were in their approved race and class categories. And so Populus in handling, and also, by the way, that institutional racism means that people that are factoring with those banks get less money, pay higher fees, and pay more interest rate, just simply because of their where they were born and who they are. And so a cool part about the way that Populus is approaching this is the fact that he's able to disintermediate the local stranglehold that all these banks have on business in Delhi or, you know, in Indonesia or Australia or wherever they happen to be doing this, because now it's global. And so you can also see where the social component of this will be a huge aspect as Populus takes off. In success, but also in the sense of in failure. In those places where factoring is used as social control, a class level of control on businesses, that's gone. I mean, as soon as Populus is available and you've got a computer and you can hook up and sell your invoice to a guy in Denmark who does not care how melanin rich your skin is, hey, that's gone. And so that is another aspect of this, and I found that very harmonious with the Populus name and the other linguistics that I kept running into. Again, thus my writing about Populus and saying why it was so damn cool.
Well, yeah. I mean, the name Populus, just to get that, derived from I used to play the game Populus, and it was Populus the beginning, basically. So hence we are a new phrase in in financial revolution in terms of the crypto sphere, and Populus is the beginning of things to change, and change in the future coming as well. I mean, we got back to where we got with the Pokens, and the Pokens kind of, like I said, kind of got us to the perfect spot in terms of having a full understanding of how this platform is going to work. But we wanted to give it a bit more than your average ordinary platform or your average ordinary token or coin in the sphere. And we wanted to bring something to the whole crypto sphere that is not basically there. And what we came up with was with the PPT, basically the asset of the platform, to actually use that on the platform in such a way that is not being currently used, and allow people to purchase invoices with the token that they purchased from the pre-ICO. And what we did was we created a sort of marginal collateral smart contract where users of the token could deposit their PPT into a collateral contract and get money lent on that PPT to trade basically invoices with.
Sure. And, let me intrude then and say the way that Steve's come up with it here, it's basically the first ever that we've seen example of a way to get passive income off of the active movement of cryptocurrencies through smart contracts. Again, a brilliant innovation. Go ahead.
Yes. Yeah. So I mean, we're not a security. We never ever said we want to be a security, and we don't have voting rights on our token. But I mean, it didn't stop the thought to reward PPT holders with a sort of model, in a sense, that allows them to participate in the actual platform at a different type of level. So, I mean, one of the questions that we get asked about how the PPT collateral contract work is, do you have some form of credit line? How are you going to back the PPT when there is no funds there? So I'll clear that up now. Basically, as I'm speaking, as me and Clif spoke about it yesterday, I'll go in a little bit more detail again. What we've been doing in the past 6 months is speaking to a lot of investment firms and venture capitalists about their participation in ICOs in the crypto world, and the response back was, a lot of them would say, our firm don't do that kind of stuff, but we do participate personally ourselves in ICOs. So what I basically came up with was a model where we can get the involvement of that investment money into the platform, and in a sense creating funds that actually back the PPT holders' interest and desire to trade marginally invoices basically on the platform.
Yeah, so basically, it would be again another form of control over the currency sloshing around, and it would provide the entree for those people that can't get there because of the regulation that's on their business. Hedge funds and this kind of thing are basically forbidden from investing in cryptos, but their individual owners or individual participants in those funds recognize a good deal, but they also recognize that legislation, barrier to entry, and so on is always going to be trailing, and so if they're going to get there, they need to get there outside of that fund. And you were smart enough to see their interest in involving themselves, and it makes a lot of sense. I mean, it's also another form of passive income, so to speak, for those people that just want to stash fiat and receive a pretty safe level of yield. And let's acknowledge there has been no yield in the central bank world or decreasing yield for the last 30 years, and essentially no yield the last 5 or 6 years to speak of. And so we have insurance companies, pension funds, anybody trying to do anything with money is basically dying on the vine because they're not getting any kind of income flow flowing through, even at the level of 0.5% a month. They'd be really satisfied these days with 0.5% a month. They'd be falling all over themselves. And it used to be that, they could get maybe 6, 7, 8% a year pretty much guaranteed. So there's a huge need for the income stream, both at the passive side and for large pools of capital. Again, Steve had been at the right spot. His data had wiped the illusion from his eyes, and you could see this quite clearly.
Yeah, so that's exactly very on target again, Cliff. Yeah, that's right. So I mean, in terms of seeing it like that, what I also see for the future as well, I only see PPT rising on the way we've structured the token in terms of the buyback, and also the increase in terms of demand by other institutional investors coming into the crypto space, and other people that want to basically trade invoices. So so having that idea of the investment firms and VCs creating these pools is quite an important aspect as well, because what we're going to get is we're going to have PPT rising in value very high due to demand, and the opportunities open for other to get involved in invoice finance in other markets such as Europe and China and the Middle East and Asia. And then that would basically give it a high market capitalization, and then we need that funds elsewhere to offset against the PPT holders trading their invoices, which is going to be which I never put figures on things. I never gamble. I never speculate. But I can actually foresee that we will need the funds to offset against the marginal contracts, smart contracts, basically. So
sure, and let's be quite clear about this. Steve is explicitly saying that they are planning for success, because success in business brings its own set of problems, and if you don't plan for success, you're going to be doomed to failure. And Steve is planning for the success of the PPT token to take off. And he's also offering something that, as I say, is highly valuable, which is the disintermediation, the evening of the costs all around globally, and then the return of yield to investors. And this is what I saw, was that investors were going to flock to this. They don't want to get active. They're not really active in trading. They don't want to be exposed to the gyrations of the cryptocurrencies, but they need to get into the space. And this is something they understand. This is something that's going to be reasonably safe. And Steve and I chatted quite extensively yesterday about it, and he can go into it now about dealing with the security of the data, the validation of the now the validation, this is the beauty part of it, because he's got the extracting of the language using the business markup language, that tool, he's able to extract the identifiers from the businesses before they even get to the point of trying to be authenticated in order to sell an invoice. So he knows about them from his data before they even apply, and in fact, if he wants to sit down and do it, he can say, oh, these people from the data sets are likely to be my clients, and because he can see who needs the factoring. And so he can validate these people ahead of time, so when they actually do approach the system, that is, when they do first have their contact with Populous because they want to sell an invoice, then it becomes a lot easier on them as well, because he knows who they are. He can see what the annual reporting is on the data. You can look them all up, and so the validation process is pre-done to a certain extent, eliminating a lot of the thrashing around, and also really working instantly from the very beginning against fraud and other issues in the security part of it all. Touching on that point. So basically, what we get asked a lot of. I mean, I don't know if people are forgetting or they haven't read the white paper, but it clearly states that the XBRL tool targets invoice sellers. So it won't be a matter of how many people you got signed up on the website. We're not looking in terms of waiting for sign-ups to come on the system, like or the chicken and egg scenario of either you have investor or invoice sellers. We have both, basically. We have the PPT holders, and then we have the fiat holders, and then we have the invoice sellers. So as Cliff was saying just now, how we do this is because of the date that we have, we don't necessarily have to target the people that immediately need cash flow finance or invoice finance, as we call it. We can actually look and see 6 months, a year, or 2 years ahead
basically those guys that are coming into the scenario where they're going to need invoice finance. So we can start planning a year in advance or even 2 years, looking at different models and other companies that have been in the same situation and gone on to get invoice finance. So we can literally plan for the future and say, okay, what we're going to do is we're going to market to these guys that don't even know they need finance yet, and be in their mind as their first point of call, and more or less the guys that were, and the platform will basically be in their mind as saying, okay, let's go and try this platform because they saw this issue coming that we're now facing, and they've already given us a solution. Whereas these guys seem to have our interest, they basically have our interest at heart, and not those guys that are just basically seeking the profit from the trade that we can provide them. So that is the unique thing about the data science around our XBRL data and cluster analysis that we use, is the fact that we can basically foresee what is going to happen in terms of the acquisition of the clients.
And you can, so you don't even really have to do the marketing. Just the populist concept is going to be self-marketing. That aspect of it, I think, is not going to be too much of a problem. And you've dealt with the, you're sort of front-loading your entire process for anti-fraud security all the way through from the invoice side. And you've eliminated, by the way you've structured your smart contracts, you've eliminated the issue of double spend, so to speak, where someone tries to proffer the same invoice over and over again, that sort of thing. And you know the businesses before you even begin doing business with them. So eliminated a lot of those aspects. And then your smart contracts are, I'm assuming they're not multi-sig. Correct?
No.
Okay, so they don't have the vulnerability that multi-signature contracts would allow, and so very tight for security there. Plus, you're not keeping any clients' data on the network at all, so their data is hidden behind a smart ID number in your SQL Server databases on both sides, and so pretty much everybody's anonymous. Trust is removed, and everybody can trust the platform itself.
Yeah. So So touching on the data security side of things, basically, I did some consultancy for some registrars in the past, which were registrars are basically share registrars. These guys, where every PLC company has a registrar that basically handles and looks after their documents, their capital interest, the allotments, share certificates, basically, and nominee accounts. And what I did, I spotted some vulnerabilities in their data security, around the data security aspect, in terms of information that was leaking through various. I'm not going to go too much into it, but it was companies that were handling billions and billions worth of data on behalf of their clients, and I basically picked up loopholes in there and basically helped them close those loopholes. So data security has been a very main important aspect of Populist platform itself, because we don't want that type of thing to happen, and also knowing who we're actually dealing with. So we built mechanisms in place that actually kind of works down to the T in terms of determine these people are who they say they are, and also we got prevention locks on the platform that so that basically allow time caps to stop fraud from occurring. So it's like a kind of rest period that funds are moving in transit, but then they're stopped just for a few seconds or a few hour or so until we're happy with the transaction. Just a last minute check if we need be. It doesn't have to always happen, but I mean, and also the duplication, as you mentioned as well, because of the way we store the invoice and smart contracts. So this is very important. I've been to a lot of meetings and seminars where banks are saying, we need a private blockchain because of sensitive data. Well, basically in invoice finance, what you got is you got platforms that are basically telling you who these companies are selling invoices to and who are the debtors that owe these companies money. And at the same time why would you need a private blockchain if this information is already open? So what we basically did is we decided that, okay, we're going to put the anonymity of what exists in the Bitcoin world in the platform. So what that means is anyone that wants to trade invoices that comes in with cryptocurrency can still maintain anonymity by not putting their name in. So in our smart contracts, you can actually put the name of what you want it to be, or you can leave it anonymous. So these are also, it's important for these companies that are trading with funds for on behalf of the companies to say, put in ABC Limited, and that will show up in a smart contract. They can take that to their accountant, and the accountant will say, okay, I clarify that is your trade you've done. And those guys that don't want it, they can have it anonymous, as in no one really wants to know I traded my Bitcoin for this amount. So what effectively happens is we have a platform that takes the actual physical contract of the invoice agreement between the investor and borrower and stores it as a hash inside the smart contracts. And then basically this document is in real time only accessible to those guys in that trade of who settled in that invoice trade on IPFS. So they can actually view the contract themselves in its physical form. And I mean, what we're gonna see in the future is in the next less than 2 weeks, we're gonna see real invoice transaction on Etherscan, which we haven't seen, or we're probably just seeing. We're going to see real financial transactions in the form of invoices. And the other thing is, what is important is because we're doing the IPFS route, is we have a record of every invoice that has been sold, duplication. So there's been some scenarios where in China where guys are either trading with themselves and then going to another invoice factory and then going there. That's been offset. So we're having an asset record for anyone, even existing fiat sort of factoring institutions to come and look at that data on the blockchain anyway and open it. So that is, we're going to cover Populous as an all-round solution to invoice factoring globally, basically.
Sure, and let me
No, I can't hear you. No volume. No, can't hear you. Volume's gone. I think it's the reception. Can you hear me? I think you're gonna have to pause it. I can't hear you.
Recording again.
I can't see you though.
Okay, let me fix that. Oh, we've got that going. Hang on a second. There we go. That's gone. And we're back on. Any sight of me there?
Not yet, no.
Okay. Well, I tell you what, we're having Skype gremlins. I've got you on full screen at the moment, and we're recording, and I'm off the screen. I think my camera and stuff is dying in the Skype gremlins. But why don't you go ahead and give me a quick rundown on your plans for rolling out over the next few months?
Okay, so our plan now is within the next week and a few days, literally just under 2 weeks from now, you're back. I can see you.
There we go. Okay, good.
Yeah. So within the next under 2 weeks now, we're going to be rolling out the alpha version, which is going to basically be a sort of simulation test sort of version of the platform that basically allows the PPT holders to transact with the potential clients that have come from the listing on the website. So these are clients not from the XBRL, but guys that have showed interest and have been signing up. So
volunteers, we'll call them.
Yeah.
Yes. And so this is basically a real world test of an alpha is what we think of as pre-production, where the idea is to break it and find out where those points that are broken and then fix them.
That's correct. Yeah. So everyone, I don't know how people are taking it, but what I've been reading in the Slack is how is my PPT going to be secured? So we're not actually using anyone's real PPT. What we're doing is we're using it on a test net. So no one's, we will never ever launch something without being 100% sure and secure that we've covered all aspects of security. So this is just a test, and what that will allow us to all see basically is invoice transactions going through the Etherscan and functionality all working fine. I mean, that will be a big moment for the crypto world in itself, because coming at the moment. We don't even have a single institution going through there providing documentation or loans through Etherscan or any of the blockchain explorers at the moment. So that's what we're going to be doing. That's going to start rolling out from in the next 2 weeks, and hopefully we'll have few reasons to tweak the system. We're going to basically wrap it up in a framework, as to speak, because one of the reasons why we kept the platform code away from the public eye was because all the FUD and everything around that, people would basically just say your code's a mess. Guys don't know what you're doing. So
yeah, I've been there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we kept that away because what we will do is we will open source the platform code once we wrap it in a framework that most coders are familiar with and understand that type of way of programming instead of raw PHP core coding. And another thing to add to that is as well, the beta itself will be the first steps onto the actual platform becoming live. So we hope to clear up all the issues that we may find in the alpha, and getting to the beta will be almost the final stages to launching. The beta will start around in November, as it's clearly stated on the website. But as I said to Clif yesterday, I'm a guy that likes to move fast, so I might try and have it done before November, but I don't want anyone to hold me to that. I really want the platform to be out tomorrow, like everyone else does. But things have to be right, and a lot of the largest investors on the platform do speak to me personally, and as basically said, we want this to be successful, so take your time.
Correct. It's with software, having been through it before, there's always delays, there's always problems. So it's better to make it work, and then you can make it pretty, and then you can get it out, and no one will remember that they thought it was late. All they'll say is, "Damn, look at how good this works."
That's it. So I mean, and you just touched upon a point there about how the perception of the platform looks without the skin on. So at the moment, one of the emphasis is building around the UI on it. So it's actually functioning, working as we speak now. But like I explained to you yesterday, there's no point in opening something up for people to test that doesn't have the right UI on it, because that also will bring criticism in as well, unnecessary criticism. So,
well, you have to test the UI component as well.
That's right, yes.
I mean, if it's badly designed, they won't like using it, even if it's very functional.
That's right. So we initially released the wireframe. I'm sure you've seen it.
Yes.
Of some aspects of it. What is yet to be, I put a screenshot of the wallet inside on the Slack. That's yet to be released publicly. But I mean, what will be released after that shortly will be the breakdown, the sort of I'll say an analytical model of how the collateral smart contract works with your percentages of time and price stability of the PPT token in the real time, so people can see actually how much margin they're getting for their PPT token against the invoices. So that page will come out shortly as well.
Yeah, let me also say that it occurs to me, just didn't occur to me yesterday, but with your structure and the fact that it's on Ethereum platform and able to be viewed, you would be able to write a nice little tool that you could add onto your website. Probably have already thought of this, of providing real-time analytic metrics for people at the general state of the invoicing markets. So if you came on in with an automotive invoice for your automotive shop, you could look and see how much discount people were getting in automotive shops globally, simply because maybe automotive shops had a higher risk level or something along those lines. And so you could get all of this stuff up front in the way of like pure disclosure off of real data, provided just by the analytics of what's happening so far on Populous. Amazing concept.
No, that's right. You're exactly right. So I think it's touched in the white paper around we creating smarter oracles. So
that's it. I knew I'd thought about seen that somewhere. Yes, that's right. Yeah.
Yeah. So what we found as well. Well, more or less, I like to say we, but I mean generally, I was looking at the area as a whole, and I realized that what is not there is enough these type of data sets, because if we really want financial sort of crypto sphere to take off, we've got to have the same functionality and the same data available to us as in the old system, or this current system at the moment that's not working. So what I decided was to put these data sets into an Oracle, and that can feed into them via Populous to other people that want to use them. So in a sense, like you just explained, we'll have the analytics of the invoices going through, also the credit algorithm for other projects that will appear in the crypto space to use those data sets as oracles to basically hopefully not replicate the same business as us, but create new innovative ideas in the area as well. So we're just trying to build a backbone for the whole crypto sphere, and not build a backbone that is going to take years to establish. Because, like I just mentioned, I don't want to wait years to see if something happen. I want it to happen now, but it has to happen perfectly as well. So night and day, I'm up most nights a day making sure, and also the development team as well. They don't sleep as well as that. So we're just trying to make something a reality that when we do open source it, then we can have that community effect of people building off from what we've basically opened as well. So apart from Populous, we have the tools and elements that drive and make Populous work. We will open that source as well so people can use it as well. I mean,
I can't actually wait. I want to get my hands on some of that data.
Well, you're free to have that data whenever you want. I mean,
well, thank you very much. Yeah, as soon as I get relocated, I'll hit you up for it.
Yeah, but I mean, what I was thinking as well, and some others of sport as well. What would be a good idea? You don't have to participate. We don't want to take you off course of what you're doing, but I can just genuinely add you to the GitHub so you can overview and see what is there.
I would really appreciate it. That'd be really cool. Yeah.
So, and you can even have a look at the XBRL as well document. Someone said to me today about painting in the XBRL, because what we're seeing is that people are painting in invoice factoring ideas on the blockchain. And what my response is like, the most important thing about Populous is not the factoring that we're doing, but the way to find customers that need this service. And
well, also there's the aspect of patents and intellectual property that is a time delay. It's again a barrier to entry. You have to get involved with attorneys, and so you spend your time getting the document that says you did it, as opposed to going on out and just doing it. And there is a good business model that says your first innovation you don't care about. You use that to springboard up to dominate the space, and then those innovations from that point on, you've got enough money to have the attorneys, and you can just have them go off and do it. You don't worry about it much. So I understand and I've been both routes. I've spent the money on it, and it yielded nothing other than 4 years delay, and so I would never do that again. To be honest, I'd never even seek that.
Yeah, and that's what I mean, and that's the same sort of philosophy I have. If you're trying to add value to something, the best way is just to have it. I mean, I want basically just to end it short. It's not really a route that I was thinking of, painting stuff and delaying stuff in terms of around the XBRL. But at the same time, like I mentioned, you can have access to it. Clif.
I'd love to. And let's be clear here for the audience. As an investor, as somebody, and I actually have to say that I have PPT tokens. I've got a few of these things because it's like I didn't want to miss this one because it's such a long-term investment. But my thinking is that I don't care about Steve putting a patent on an idea that came out of his head and is now in use, because my confidence and value that I will extract from my relationship with Steve is not in that thought. It's in what he's going to think next. So it's his next brilliant idea that's going to bring in that value. So you just, I always invest in humans. They're far better than any other thing out there. Steve, I'm going to thank you very much. We've been at this an hour and a half, and I'm going to post this mostly unedited. I'm going to put a link to Populous on the posting on YouTube, and I will send you guys the raw video or slice and dice it any way you want. We did a better job this time, I think, than we did yesterday.
Yeah, well, absolutely. Yeah, I agree as well. So.
Okay,
Yeah,
and
like again,
the poor
thank you
fellows
as
that
well.
have to watch all of this, and believe me, there will be investors that will watch this and dissect this right and left. So they'll be watching this all the way down. But you've done very well, especially for someone barely out of his teens. You've got really good presence here, and I'm a very happy investor and populace, and I see no reason that state of being will shift at all as we go forward. And in fact, I think I'll just be happier and happier as we go along.
That's it.
So
I mean, yeah, I mean, that's it. So, I mean, I'd like to thank you again for basically everything, for basically just bringing populist awareness to the wider audience. As we know, we don't do press release or anything as in such. We don't pay for editorials, and never have you asked me for a pay or anything like that. I've never
Oh,
met
no,
you
never would
until
do that. It's in my
today,
reader's
basically.
interest. Yeah.
So, I mean, I'm quite grateful that you saw populist for what it is. It kind of gives me goosebumps saying that, but it's the truth. And I mean, there's a lot more to come. Like I said, I think we populists and yourself and myself, we have a long road to go. So
Yeah,
I'm
and
quite.
I'm perfectly sanguine with saying that, publicly, that should you guys ever need anything I might be able to provide, you only have to ask. No intent of charging you money or any of that. You guys are on a good road there that I certainly want to support. So hey, if you think I have a hand in maybe providing a solution to a bit of a problem, let me know. Glad to provide.
100%, 100%, Cliff.
Well, thank you very much. My dogs have been fed, and now they're
Yeah.
they're on my case to go out. So I've got to get moving here.
Yep.
But I'll
100.
get this up in the next few hours, and we'll see what kind of an effect it really makes. I think we'll both be very surprised.
Time will tell.
Time will
Yes.
tell. Thank you very much. You did a much better
Thanks,
job
Cliff.
today than yesterday.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. Have a good day.
Okay, thank you.